Hi, I'm Noelle Marshall with the Co-Creators Convergence. Thank you for joining us as we celebrate world unity. Our question is, what is needed to mobilize a world unity movement now? Thank you so much for being here. We have so much to learn from this conversation and so much to share because, as Marianne says, we get stronger when we share. Thank you.
Thank you, Noelle. I wanted to spend a moment and say how honored I am to be here with my mentor and dear friend, Dr. Jean Houston. She has been an incredibly rich and powerful influence in my life, inspiring me to move beyond an ordinary, quiet, less than remarkable life, to engage with the magic of the possible, to step into a larger story, to dare to dream, and in that dreaming, to dare to become. Dr. Jean Houston is one of the most foremost visionary thinkers and doers of our time. A scholar, philosopher, and researcher in human capacities, she has been regarded as one of the principal founders of the human potential movement. She found herself curious about highly creative people and spent years studying the 20 top minds of our time. She has known some of the most fascinating people, from Eleanor Roosevelt to Margaret Mead, and I've even heard a wonderful story how she inspired a song with John Lennon. Marianne Williamson has said that Jean Houston is one of her deepest sources of inspiration. Jean helped Hillary Clinton write a book, It Takes a Village. And she is an active consultant to 35 leaders in countries all around the world. In fact, she has traveled and worked internationally in over 100 countries. And I can tell you personally that she is very tough to keep up with. She is a prolific writer, author of 25 books, including Manual of the Peacemaker, A Passion for the Possible Human, A Mythic Life, Learning to Live Our Greater Story, and Jump Time. When I was approached about this event and asked the question, how do we bring humanity to that next level with peace and unity? There was no one I could think of that would be able to inspire each of us to that answer more than Jean Houston. Welcome, Dr. Jean Houston.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. What a pleasure to be with you all. Jennifer, it's actually 33 books, but who's counting?
Like I said, you can't keep up with her.
But, you know, I'm just thinking of my dear friend of so many years who has just spoken. And, you know, the fact is, I would say to her, as I said during the time that she was part of the election process, for goodness sakes, girl, every day go out there and put out the message of the alternative government. The alternative government that is the one that is feisty and rich and spicy and is ready to give real, brilliant ideas, and not just ideas, but to create communities of practice all over where people can grow together and become together. Dear friend, this is really your time, because politics as we have known it is in arrears, is dying. And there is a new force which you represent, dear friend. And if you would just play the alternative government and what happens with the marvelous ideas and things that happen day by day, just think where we all could be. I'm going to give her a call after this. Tell her why. Anyway, it's so lovely to be with everybody. And I believe that what is the nature, what's happening? Where are we going?
Where are we going? Yes. Well, the question that was posed was, what does humanity need now to bring about peace and unity? Mm-hmm. I think about your talks from 10 years ago. You were talking about how this is the time and we are the people. Mm-hmm. And I would just love to hear what you see in how we're progressing.
Well, this is the time. We are the people, and this is probably the most interesting time in human history. I mean, other times thought they were it. They're wrong. This is it. This is it when we grow or die, evolve or perish. This is it when we turn the page on who and what we really are. It is this that within each one of us is simmering the new genes of a new creation, a creation that is the regeneration, the regenesis of human nature, the regenesis of human societies, the recreation of ways in which we interact with each other, the breakdown of the membrane between people, the dying of the old senses of otherness. In fact, we're crossing the great divide of otherness. The movement towards a higher unity, and I personally believe codings coming to us from the universe herself. We now know that we don't just live in the universe, but indeed the universe lives in us. Do you realize what that means? This is just decent, basic quantum physics. It means that we have access to totalities. How we work with these is something else. We're in a renaissance. Renaissance from the Italian rinascita, rinascita, rebirth. And when we look at the time of Renaissance, it's fascinating. It was preceded by such a gigantic time of troubles in the famous 14th century, with plagues everywhere, with a huge amount of the population of Europe wiped out, with constant wars. And yet, out of that complete collapse of societies was engendered the Renaissance, the time of radical renewal, the time in which a man like Leonardo da Vinci would go deep into himself, study the chromatics and the hues of his own inner space, and come out with an evolution of understanding that led to an incredible cosmic unfolding of inventions, of ideas, that we are still working towards. I mean, you look at his pictures, they were pictures from 500 years in the future. That's something else that we discover in quantum physics. Time is simultaneous. Past, present, and future are simultaneous. Now, whenever I, as something of a cultural historian, when I study the evolution of anything, we find out there's always the time of troubles, whether it is in a mammal or a lizard or what have you, or a human being. Tremendous time of troubles that precedes the time of systemic awakening and transformation. That's where we are. And I don't believe that we're just in the middle of the time of troubles. We're coming towards its edge. And with it are coming factors of renewal that have really not been seen before. And I said them, regenesis of human nature. People are going inside themselves, aren't they, Jennifer? I mean, the very fact of the evolution of many of the classic mystical paths, especially those that have to do with entering, meditation, contemplation, finding the gold of the psyche, finding what Rumi could call, what did he call it? The treasury of unseen generosities. My Sicilian grandmother would sometimes look up at the sky, at the star-strewn sky, and she would say, abbondanza. Then she would look in a baby carriage, and she'd say, abbondanza. And then she would say, Gina, only she called me Januzza, inside, you and me, abbondanza. It means a lot more than abundance. And we're coming upon being so much in a time of colossal dislocation, systemic transition of everything. This has allowed us for an entering vision that is giving us the potential of deep abundanza. If I ask you, you're about 50 years old or so, is that right?
We'd like to say to 50, yes.
I'm 83, People say, oh, you can't age. No, I can't age because I'm half Sicilian. If you're half Sicilian, you don't age and you have 18 dependents, but that's another story. But the thing is, look at what you have seen in your life that has changed radically. Look at what it would, let's just hear from you, Jennifer. What is unfolding in your life?
Oh, my life is completely changing, especially now. It's going from a career and CEO and business into more of a introspective and going back to find those creative ideas inside that I have to. And that's when I touch into that, then my life flows so much better and in business and in life. And so there's so much change, constant change. But then I think I connected to you at a time in my life when I was influenced by that change, because Jean, you step into working with Jean and suddenly your life goes on high speed. We are in hyperdrive. and opportunities and synchronicities start happening because you start paying attention to what's coming in from inside out. I am very fascinated by the changes that I'm seeing from a different perspective of what's going on with this polarization in our government and in politics, and how people are being forced into that inner realm that you teach us to go to. And not only just go and touch this inner landscape, but actually to come out with something practical and some way of making a difference and doing something. I'm not sure if that's where you wanted me to go, but.
No, but I think that you're stating this, the obvious, that we are in Renaissance times, in which there is a new understanding of the value of who we are. There is an excitement and existential significance. People no longer appear inconsequential. And there's an extraordinary proclamation of a new order of human dignity and human possibilities. And that's what we're experiencing. The internal world is now knowing the cosmos for its own, and the external world is becoming psychotized. So yes, we find, people like me, people like you, that we are exploring the depth and dimension of human possibilities, but also look at what's happening in societies. Yes, they're breaking down. Just look at American society. Yes, breaking down all over the place, but at the same time, you have the rising of women, as my friend just said so beautifully, the rising of women to full partnership with men in the whole domain of human affairs. So important, because with women, the emphasis is on process rather than product, on making things cohere, develop, grow, become, the way things are interrelated with each other. As women come into the new power, as they come in to a whole new extraordinary unfolding of their inherent aptitudes, this is really what is going to keep the world going. And this changes all societies. When you look right now around the world at the societies that are working, very often, whether they are governors or heads of state or community mayors, in so many cases, who are they? They are women. Mm-hmm. Okay, now this releases men to become whom they really are, you see. So that is so very, very important. At the same time, as I said, there's a breakdown of the membrane between people. All of this that we're seeing around Black Lives Matter is a very dramatic statement that we are all part, not just of mattering to each other, but we're part of a divine unity. The way we can look at each other, regardless of how different we are, as God in hiding. The way that we can look each other and see in the other, not just their potential, but their inherent genius. People say to me, Jean, you've been around so long, what would you say is your best quality? Well, I would say I have the gift of the follow through. That's important. But also my best quality is, frankly, to cross the great divide of otherness and know that the person that I'm seeing is in many ways a deeper version of what I've thought of myself. And that when we really can bring our minds, our presencing, it's a bequest of our presence into each other, and it begins to converge, then we have transcended all of the differences, all of the histories, and we begin to come together on the sunrise of a whole new era. So it's the breakdown of the memory. The breakdown of the memory also has to do with ourselves and our spiritual self. People are letting their souls out of the closet. Because when you get into soul-driven living, whoa, what happens? Not only do you have access to many more ideas, many more codes of possibility, but you also have access to the emerging culture that has to happen if we're going to survive our time. This is the most important time in human history. Truly it is. So that we have that. We have the regenesis of our human nature. There's so many potentials that we can access. We have the regenesis of social forms. We have the breakdown of the membrane, and we have the rising tide of the depths. That each one of us is God in hiding. Some people have a hard time proving it to me, but still, it is there. What do you think, Jennifer? What do you think are the great questions of our time?
Well, actually, I wanted to go back with what you said about seeing in the other people their greatness and their potential. And I think that's a big change in the times between now and the Renaissance of the past, where we had the Leonardo da Vinci's and the individuals that were great, and we followed them or we learned from them. Now it's each of us are stepping into our own greatness and connecting together in groups. And I think that's very important too with this Renaissance, is that it's community. We have to evolve together, you know, and to inspire
And if we
each
evolve together, where are we going? You see, this is my big question now. What is the lure of becoming? Huh? What is really pulling us forward to creation? What makes us get out of our chairs and turn off the television sets or stop the social media that goes on all the time and say, who am I? Where am I? I agree to be partnered by the depths. You can give the depths different names like God or the universe. I agree to be partnered. And even if you're not sure what that is, but to begin to walk along, you know, arm in arm with the cosmos, always in a situation of interaction. Now, who is this other if you can't see it as God or cosmos? It could be an archetype, couldn't it?
Yeah.
A pattern of huge significance that through the ages may have taken on other forms. Like the one I particularly like is the goddess Athena. I find her very interesting, you know, because she's ever near and she's also womanly, and yet she has immense strength, and she goes for nurturing cultures and civilizations. And I find that when I have the Athena archetype working, I don't worship Athena, it's nothing like that, but I have that essence. I find that I can go into these cultures. And what was it, 109 countries at this point, and I don't know how many cultures. And I feel that I can be transparent to the transcendence that is always there. Deeply appreciate the poorest woman who seems to have nothing, and see her greatness and help her engender her greatness in real action in the world. And above all, I can learn so much from all these others. So I think that we are in a time of that partnership. You know, the old Christian hymn about Jesus is part of that. Oh, he walks with me and he talks with me, tells me I am his own. Well, the same thing. I could sing certain kinds of chants from Hinduism, and they're still saying the same thing, you know. We are, but as we see and understand the nature of the cosmos and its infinite potentials, we also see that we are cosmic beings. Some people, like you perhaps, and I think surely Marianne, see themselves kind of cosmic agents who find them caught up in a corner of a galaxy. This funny little tiny planet, you know, why am I here? I could have been back among the stars when I had such a good time. But the fact is, we are here. We're here in the great time in human history, but I think we're here also in the cosmic time of human history, the cosmic time of human history.
Yes.
So I think that as we plunge more deeply into the depth of ourselves, we can then see and work with our outer reality with greater depth, you see, and to know that we are part of the divine spirit. And so I look at all these things and I wonder, when we realize the protean spirit, that we are not encapsulated bags of skin dragging around dreary little egos, but we have within ourselves cosmic adventures. We have within us many persona. You know, if I say I'm Jean and I'm a teacher and I'm this and that, but I'm also a dog person. I was once a serious fencer. I am also a cook, really a decent cook. That's one thing I do well. But I'm also a traveler, God knows, and a stand-up comedian sometimes. But I have many parts to myself, as anybody here who's listening has many parts to themselves. Persona. To think of yourself just as an isolated ego is to crush the fullness, the genius of who and what you are. So I give exercises, for example, of having people, I do it with good music, stirring music, in which I have them take on the capacities. For example, let's do it right now. What is a part of yourself that you need now that's not necessarily stage front, but should be in your life?
Oh, right now the writer needs to come forward. How many of us have writers, you know?
Oh my, yes. Okay, but all right, so take that writer, yes. Now, who is forward in your life that is easy, that is fun, that you find you can slip into it beautifully? Give me the other part.
Oh gosh, the one that, for me, the meditator, but that's not a very active person.
Well, that's all right, but give me just for the benefit of everybody listening.
The person that, I mean, I love to go out in nature. I love to be that carefree and work in the garden and play out there. So that part of me is easy and fun. Yeah.
Oh, let's take the gardener, shall we?
Yes.
The gardener is wonderful. Now get into your gardener persona, just slip it on. And everybody who's listening, choose something that's easy. Like for me, it's the cook. For Jennifer, it's the gardener. Who is it for you? And become that being. Identify deeply with that being. All right? And normally I'd be playing beautiful music at this point. But I want you now to take this gardener that you feel easy with, that you love. For some of you out there, it may be the dancer, it might be the comic, it might be the mother or the father. Take this person, it might be the one who solves problems. I mean, I don't know. But take this person. And for her, for Jennifer, it's going to be having to do with writing. And have this other persona who really resides deeply in you do the writing. Just start writing and see what happens. And for those others of you, take this other person with whom you feel good, like for me, it's a cook, and begin to do the thing that you find difficult or you tend to put off. She's put off writing. But do it from that perspective of taking on the body-mind system, the whole beingness, the sheer, fruitful, creative aspect of this person who is so easy for you, like the gardener, like the cook is to me. But let that person go and do the writing or do the relationship. Yes, that's a big one. Or do the exploration.
Beautiful.
You see? So that would be an example, wouldn't it?
Yes, powerful.
Of utilizing the many, many parts of ourselves. We err greatly. There's two ways that we err greatly. One is thinking that our dogs and cats are less than ourselves. It isn't true. They are other tribes. They are other nations. They've been here a lot longer than we have in many ways. And the other is thinking that we are just this dull ego, local self. And that's only a front face for this immensity, this great cast of characters and a huge cast of abilities that we have within ourselves.
Yeah, I remember you would have me dancing to find answers and actually moving around the room and using my whole body to thrilling music. And that's how we would find answers or solutions to something practical with business or, beautiful.
Because different parts of us have access to different solutions. But when we insist in a rather patriarchal way, when we insist on trying to be one particular type of self to do everything else, it doesn't work. And this is something that Native peoples know. And so they sit around in their circle and they take a big problem that they might have, like a harvest, say, and they'll have a person who is the comic, another who is the crazy person, another who is the nurturer, another who's the lawgiver. And they look at the problem from being these different kinds of people, you see. See, friends, very powerful forces have risen in this time, and I believe are propelling the current state of collective potential growth. And they work in parallel and they fuel one another. So yes, when we started, I described them as the regenesis, the repatterning of human nature, to begin to tap into these enormous potentials that have been lying dormant. This happens, by the way, throughout evolution. When something is really awfully difficult, the new potentials come up. They say, my turn, or else we're out of here. And then the regenesis of human societies. I have a program right now where I've got people literally all over the world, especially young people, design a world that works. You could do it, let's say, design a school. And so I'm getting these letters from people who are designing new schools. It's interesting how in most of them, the emphasis is on arts in the school, arts and music. So the children are just not crushed by verbal, linear, analytical patterns, but instead they're thinking in music, they're thinking in story, they're thinking in clay, they're thinking using so many more aspects, the genius of sheer childhood, you know. And I have other people who are telling me about, well, something has happened all over the world. And it comes from these people. There is a rising tide of spirit, isn't there? There's a rising tide of spirituality rising everywhere. What does this mean for your spiritual life? It means, by golly, you better start looking at it. You can start, whatever you want to call it, talking to God, talking to the angel, talking to whatever it is in your spiritual experience that calls you, that is evoking you, who is saying to you, it is time to wake up now. A lot of people are having interesting, sometimes it's just a few seconds, sometimes it lasts longer, of awakening. Whoa, this is what the world is like. Often followed by the second part, oh boy, what a louse I've been. And that's the point where you forgive yourself. You don't go into it. You forgive yourself and say, look, I really loused up here, but I forgive myself. And I am now going to make many active gifts of charity, of beauty, of seeing the other in wonderful ways, of appreciating instead of blaming, of appreciating people, things, a flower, a cloud, a child. To have days of just pure appreciation and gratitude. That kind of thing. And then you find you start to take your own spiritual deepening life much more seriously, I find. And so you do it. You take that time to meditate or to pray or just to enter into the great and holy, potent, pregnant silence. Because I find for myself, at least, that being in the silence allows the larger life, the great cosmic connections, the solutions to come forward. I think it's also important to have a group of like-minded friends who are not there to gossip or to blame, but who are there to attune with each other, to move into a higher form of being and to keep spiritual practice going. Yes. Oh, we are in such an incredible time of human history. And I find that most people, given opportunity, given training, can learn to think and feel and know in so many new ways, can become more creative, more imaginative. That's very important, imagination, and aspire to a much larger awareness, one that I find is far better equipped to deal with the incredible complex challenges of life. Now, we all know what dear old Einstein said. He said, we cannot solve problems from the same level of consciousness that created them. Therefore, the consciousness that can find solutions to these problems is always there. Now, I actually, and I don't know if you know this, Jennifer, but I found this out firsthand. When I was about 7, I guess I was 8 years old, I went to a magnificent school. It was a public school in Manhattan called PS6, which was very advanced. They took us to meet some of the great elders of the time. Helen Keller, for example. When I asked her, why are you so happy? She said, you know, in her, this I'm going to imitate what she sounded like. My child, it is because I live each day as if it were my last, and life in all its moments is so full of glory. And life in all its moments is so full of glory. Yes, she was blind and deaf, but was she damaged? No. With the remaining filaments of her senses, she touched the whole world. And then Einstein, who I also met that same year.
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, my class, well, this particular class anyway, we got to go to Princeton, where he was, and we sat down, and he came up. He's a sweet old gentleman, not very tall, lots of hair, I recall. I remember him having 2 different colored socks on. He seemed a little vague. Behind him was a chalkboard all filled with equations. And he looked at us. Do you have any questions? And one of these smart aleck kids raised their hand and said, Mr. Einstein, how can we get to be as smart as you? He said, read fairy tales. We didn't like that answer at all. So another smart aleck said, well, Mr. Einstein, how can we get to be smarter than you? Read more fairy tales. Everybody was just down on that. But I had a hunch of what he really meant. And I said, Mr. Einstein, are you talking about imagination? And he got a big spot. Yeah, imagination. It is my best quality. People think it's mathematics. I'm no good at it. I have to hire students to do my math. I have such an imagination. I imagine being on a light beam and traveling through space. That gives me so many more ideas. I imagine this, I imagine that. And boy, did that teach me imagination. Because what is imagination? It's the place in the self where the self touches the mind of God. It's the place where we touch the place of creation. It's where we tap in to universal potentials in whatever way we can. That's what it is. That's what I truly, 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 truly believe that it is.
And you've taught me not just to have the imagination, but to believe in the imagination, to envision a world that works, or to really
Right.
that. Because it's, you know, before I met you, Jean, I was studying meditation. I had a very deep spiritual practice, but I was happy up there and just enjoying my meditations. And you brought me back down to earth and said, okay, what can we do with this? What can we bring and dream and make? And I think that's a very important quality as well. It's not getting too far gone, but come back and do something.
Well, for example, here's an imaginative exercise for everybody out there who may be listening. Let us say that quantum physics is right, and that we are ubiquitous throughout the universe, meaning there's variations of ourselves everywhere. And the great oneness, the great unity, the great Godedness, the great spirit says, I need variations of Jennifer. I need variations of Sharon Rose, who I see has come on. I need variations of all these people. Now, if the universe is a great unity, and if hologrammatic is a great hologram in which everything is dynamically connected to everyone else, everything else, then let us say that you need to get in touch with another version of yourself that has taken a different direction. Now, I had an experience which I've never talked about publicly, but I'm going to talk about it now. I have always thought that I was really a musician, but because my books were in show business and we traveled all the time, I didn't get to study music, but I've always felt music. And from the time I was like 3 or 4 years old, I was aware of another little Jean who was playing. And whereas I would play chopsticks, bump, 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 she was already playing wonderful tunes. And occasionally during these years, and even today, I would tune in and I would hear this complex, rich music in my mind. Well, it was about a year ago that I woke up, I sat up in bed, and suddenly in front of me was it was very, very tall, silver instrument. That's the only way I could describe it. It was a silver instrument. And it had little apertures. And out of it was pouring the most complex and beautiful music imaginable. And I was so stunned by it. And I felt, golly, this is coming from myself as a contact from my musical self, wherever she is. But suddenly in the next room, I'm a dog person. My big dog began to howl painfully. I thought, what's happened? I ran out and the music stopped. And you say the dog, oh, the dog was saying, oh, at last, because the music was hurting her ears. I came back and the instrument was gone. Now, we could say, were you in some kind of semi-sleep state? I don't know, but it was one of the most interesting experiences of my life, as some part of me was trying to reach out and touch that other part. Now, I recall you and I did a similar experience, didn't we?
Yes,
Where
yes,
you had very bad Lyme tick disease. Isn't that true?
yes.
Well, tell what happened. Tell what happened.
So this is back when you were mentoring me, and you had me move to a place where, to a dimension, actually go in and connect with this other me that lived where the body intelligence was primary. Here, where we move with our mind and our sight and vision external, and there it was a place where you know, when a child sits there and looks at their hand and they're just fascinated with the movement of their hands. And it was that kind of, they didn't lose that in that reality. They stayed with that sensation of what the body is doing in any moment. And so by connecting with her, you moved in the world aware of what each space felt like in your body. And so you became more aware of your own immune system and your own rhythms. And by connecting and learning with her on a few occasions, I was able to get in touch with my own immune system. And I haven't had any issues with my Lyme disease since. It's been 5 years, I think, 6 years. But it was
because it was killing you, as I recall.
It was not comfortable. It was not good.
But you're free of the Lyme tick disease.
I'm free, yeah. You know, the other one.
Then talk about your brother. What happened?
I was going to say the other one that was even more interesting. You know, Jean, you mentioned that you had an affinity towards music, that you loved it as a child. And I've always been fascinated, like probably a lot of people here have been interested in the quantum. I studied with Deepak Chopra and I love everything quantum. Mm-hmm. And my brother, when I started, actually it was April Fool's Day when I started with you, by the way. I don't know if you remember that. So I surrendered to the fool and started with Jean. I had this image of, okay, now I'm going to be this great teacher and human potential. And I'm going to, all these things I thought were going to happen in my time with Jean. And right away I get called from my brother about a week into our mentoring that he had pancreatic cancer. He had less than 3 months to live. And so I called Jean up and right away she's leading me on these deep processes to connect with this other dimension of me where we studied quantum healing, quantum surgery, how to do that. This other me in another dimension it was a very different world. She had a brother like my brother, but he was healthy, and I was able to do a lot of work with my brother at the quantum level because of this templating.
He was in a coma too at that time. Is that right?
He was in a coma, yes, and we were with him. And when somebody walks up behind you, you can feel them and sense they're there. That's because there's that spirit or energy about them. He was in this bed and there was nothing there. He didn't feel like he was in the room. And then worked with this connection as like a bridge to the quantum level. He kept developing leaks in different organs. And I would go in with the template. Jean does a process called entelechy, and it's got the optimal template of the person. And I would use the optimal template of his spleen or liver or different organs and overlay it and allow the information to flow between the two. And it was all things I learned from this other me at that quantum level. Needless to say, that was almost 10 years ago, and he is still alive. They didn't expect him to live. And he's still alive, and he's out sailing, I think, today. Incredible.
Well, let me ask you this, since you've had all this experience with me,
Mm-hmm.
and you've done work in which the self is repatterned.
Yes.
So my question is, as the self is repatterned, the ways in which we then are able to relate to one another will shift as well toward the discovery of new styles of interpersonal connection, new ways of being in community within a global society. See, this is a huge issue for our time. We've never had a global society before. And everybody's trying to pull it back and say, oh, America is the great this. No, how do you stay in community in a global society? Now, I personally believe that the movement seems to be from the egocentric and the ethnocentric to the world-centric, which is a fundamental change in the nature of civilization, which is what, in a sense, this meetings that we're all having is actually doing. Fundamental change in the nature of civilization, which compels a passage beyond the mindset and the institutions of thousands of years. And this is why we're all shaken up. Wait a minute, we did this for the last 7,000 years. What do you do? So critical to this reformation is, as I said earlier, a true partnership society in which men and women join together in the full social agenda. And women's genius is ready to do that and has to do it. And whatever it does, things society seem to work. But we don't yet have the metaphors for a global society. But as we gain the poetry, the metaphors, the sensibility, as we ask the cosmos for help, or God, whatever it is that you're, please let me know what it is like that we're moving towards so I can express it in my daily life in whatever way. Then we become adapted to orchestrating the many variables involved living comfortably within multicultural realities. And it raises hope for what? For forgiveness, yes? For healing between and among nations and ethnic groups. And I think essential to this matured consciousness that we're looking for is both a moral and an ethical growth toward empathy between individuals and nations that honors the golden rule of human interchange, of deep, deep seeing. Now you say, oh, Jean, you're just being stupid because look at when societies are ready to shift deeply, there is always the rising of the dark side. Or not that the dark side is bad, but that it represents an archaic form that no longer works, and sort of archaic individuals as well. We have a wonderful, panoply of these individuals in our life. And we say, oh, everything's going to pot. No, it isn't. But it is the necessary rise of a certain kind of darkness and regression that allows us to have the impetus to progress. Is that, I think.
Beautiful. It's interesting that we are so inspired now to think about what we can do locally, especially with the COVID and things, the way we're being focused inward here. And at the same time, like you said, it's a fractal of the global. We need to create use our wisdom and our insight and our dreams here locally, and then connect globally and repeat this envisioning and dreaming. And we need to jump in and catch those dreams and those things that are not here right now, those archetypes that aren't here now. You had often talked about partnering with archetypes, like you said, Athena. and how that empowers us even more to create here and to make something new.
Mhm.
I've heard stories that we're missing some archetypes. Have you heard this? That we're missing archetypes, like
Go on, tell me more.
that we're missing the archetype for community living.
Okay.
Or the archetype for men and women equal. And that by having that vision, going in and connecting with a place where they have that in another dimension or another way, you can bring that in, that reality in, inspire it here.
There are many societies that have archetypes for community living.
Mm.
That exists, and I've found that in many cultures. But it's not that there aren't archetypes for men and women meeting together, but they tend to be a little archaic, because women had to produce all these kids in order to get the world populated to do, at least for this particular species. But now everything's shifting so radically. We don't even know yet what we're going to be 20, 30, 50 years from now. But we can dream, can't we? Now, a friend of mine who is sort of the female Einstein, a very great physicist, and she's just come out with a paper which says that the future already exists in a different space-time reality. And that this is a very, very eminent European thinker, and by the name of Anna Louise Smithson, which is Dutch. But that these future codes exist and that we can select for these codes in our mind. It's part mysticism and it's part science. And these different codes for the future we can then immerse and find ourselves within them. And we find that our own life and beingness begins to shift, because there's so many wonderful new ideas that are wandering around, but also feeling. It's not just the ideas, it's feeling tones of the ideas as well.
Mm.
See? Yeah, Anna Louise Smithson, I'm starting to work with her to bring her work into the United States and other places, but she's just way beyond everybody. She is considered the female Einstein, but the future exists. Not that it exists in a pathetic pathos of here it is and forget about it, but that it really has substantive codes. We are coded beings, aren't we? We are little tiny codes, that first little dot of life that is ours, when the two gene things mesh together in this little tiny dot, that you're all dots that grew into you. But extend it further. So it's not just the dots that grew into you, but that you are dotted all over. You are a great cavalcade of dots of different kinds of potentials and ways of being and understandings and arts and sciences, that when you pay attention to them, they then unfold into very full and rich and deep realities, don't they?
Mm.
I've made a study of once of 55 of some of the most creative people in North America. They included Joseph Campbell, who I worked with off and on for 20 years. Margaret Mead, I was the adopted daughter of Margaret Mead. I have a wonderful mother. She had a wonderful daughter, but she moved in with us. That was our relationship. She was something else again, an anthropologist. And Bucky Fuller, who was another one, and Jonas Salk. You get the idea. And what I found about all of them is they use their minds in very different ways. They were fascinated by their own internal processes, and they watched the way their minds worked, and they activated these forms. So they would drop in an idea, and it was as if this multi-leveled mind that they accepted and nurtured, would then pick up the idea and spin it into all kinds of new variations. We are really cosmic beings, pretending that we are not. But when we have this different view of them, and all these people had this kind of view of themselves, I seem to be a universe. And thus they had access, but they did activate inner sensing, inner knowing, inner feeling, inner creativity. And so they lived in this state of an extraordinary level of union and unity, what we're talking about in these days together. with the depths of themselves.
Mm.
We could just look, and this is the way I find that when I look at another person, I look at him or I look at her as this cosmic constellation who is loaded with these codes of new becoming. And because I believe it in them, in many cases, they come to believe it in themselves.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Beautiful. I can't believe we've almost gone on a whole hour, and I believe there were some questions out there.
Now the questions are out there, or are they on the chat?
Noelle is going to share with us
Okay.
she'll read some questions. Noelle?
Please.
If she's there she is.
Okay, there have been so many comments and questions that I'm going to have to go back through here to find them. So someone says, Elizabeth Fenton says, Neville called the Christ the imagination. Are you familiar with Neville?
Yes, I'm familiar with Neville. I actually saw him once, many, many years ago. He was a fascinating, well, if I said preacher, but it was more of an evocateur. And he had an incredible way of getting right to the essence of something and then taking it beyond. So yes, he and Einstein were right there together, that imagination is the great form from which the coding, from which everything who was it? I'm trying to think, was it William Blake who said that, I'll have to try to remember, but the idea was that God is fascinated by the productions of our mind, and that we have several kinds of imaginations. This was Immanuel Kant. Reproductive imagination, where we just sort of repeat and put things together. And then productive imagination, woo, that's where we tap into the essence of the universe itself, and it boundlessly flows with all kinds of new ideas and new things. The productive imagination.
Fabulous.
I've got it. The universe is in love with the productions of time.
Oh.
And we are part of the productions of time that are producing. The universe is in love with the productions of time, and the time engenders, which is what we are.
We have one more comment here from Melissa. Crete, 3,400 years ago, had a pretty good archetype for women and men living well together. Women were spiritual leaders. How do you think we lost that archetype, Jean? Any ideas?
Well, is she talking about Crete 3,000 or 4,000 years ago, or three
Yes.
or 4,000 years ago? I'm not aware of anything. Well, many ancient societies had that. You know, it wasn't just Crete. It was just that that's the one nearest in our Western mind. I think what happened is the invasion by the Indo-Aryan invaders, starting from, 3,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, and bringing nomadic patriarchal attitudes that crushed the old sensitivities, the web of kinship between women and men, and brought in their male gods to topple the female gods. It was a mess, you know, and they dreaded the subtlety of the caress and went for, you know, ravaging of women. It was a bad time. And these people went not only into Greece and the southern Mediterranean, but they also spread out into India as well, the other things. And now we are at the end of that period, I hope. And the point is not to let the digital technologies and the artificial intelligences take over. We are still at the beginning of exploring our immensities and our creativity.
Well,
I still want a real dog. I don't want a little robot promise dog.
I am so glad to hear you say that, because when people talk about what we're up against, I think artificial intelligence, you know, because usually we lag so far behind, it's going to come in and consume us before we even know it's here. Do you have any validity to that, or you speak to?
Well, a lot of people are speaking about it. There's an enormous amount of thinking going on about that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not here, but it will be here in about 10, 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just sort of creeping in with practical kinds of things. But The point is, this is the time in which we deepen our human intelligence. When we look at the genius that we contain and not just look for the objectification of that genius in some kind of artificial device. So my big argument has been for the last, God, 30, 40 years, go human before you go android, because the human has so much more to give us.
Beautiful. Okay, and there is another question here from Annie Spade. Would you speak to the human connection to nature?
We are nature. I mean, we are nature. We got nature growing all over us anyway. When we dislocate from nature, we lose our souls.
Right.
We lose who we are. I mean, it is in nature that we often find ourselves again, especially if we can be quiet with nature and just say, ooh, ah, wow, you know, go beyond the ooh, ah, and the wow, and know that you are the latest leaf on the tree of reality.
Well, Jean, this has been...
We are deep-rooted blossomers. That's what we are.
All right. I love that. I'm going to, we're going to need to conclude our time here, but before we do, I think it's so very important. I know you just started a course with the Shift Network, and I want to let people know how you can get together, or how they can find you and sip more of your wisdom, because we only have an hour here, and that's impossible to fit all that into.
They can also go to jeanhouston.com, you know.
Okay.
Houston.org, and we do a lot of programs.
Yeah. And as a student of Jean's, and I'm lucky to have mentored with Jean, I have to say that take advantage of her wisdom and be with her, because she is an incredible lady and has changed my life. Yeah.
And you have changed ours. So, you know, we're one of your descendants, Jean. We haven't studied directly with you, but we do study with Jennifer. Love her morning meditations.
Wonderful work, beautiful work. Thank you.
Yes, very dedicated. And we also have a guest that wants to say hello to you, Sharon Rose.
Hi, Sharon. Yes, I thought, where are you? There, I see you now. How are you? Are you going to be doing something too here?
Well, what an amazing segue you did. I'm talking about quantum chi.
Quantum chi, oh my.
My project.
Anything better than quantum chi.
Right. I mean, so many things, even about nature, what you were talking, well, always, you know, I feel so, my heart is with you for so long. Your teaching, and of course, you know, Bob Masters has played such an immense role in my life.
Yes. And you and he admired you so much. He thought that you were a kind of epiphany of the goddess in dungarees. The
Perfect.
That's perfect. Well, I think we should conclude our time here with Jean. Thank you so much on behalf of the Co-Creators Convergence. If anyone would like to see the recording of this, it will be available in about a week or so. Give us a week or so at www.cocreatorsconvergence.com. And thank you so much, Jean, Jennifer. We love you both.